the notorious American atheist,
strangled, burned, and dismembered after copying a plea deal, hiding out in a Swiss chateau, Madalyn Murray O'Hair. Hello again, friends, and welcome to another episode of Well-Hung History, where we tell the tales of the condemned and the executed. And on this one, we'll expand and expound the reach to include the murdered. I'm Terry Allen, and thanks for joining us. Our topic is the notorious American atheist, militant feminist, and agitator, Madalyn Murray O'Hair. Her life and death are equally dramatic and tragic. Everything about her suggests flames spewing everywhere. A Medusa of sorts. There's no meditation, no yoga mats, no namaste here, and definitely no prayers. She was a bat out of hell, figuratively, and who knows, maybe literally. Everything about her makes the blood pressure rise. So let's talk about her life and what she espoused and what she despised, and there's a lot of that. And we'll cover her very mysterious and brutal end. And we'll also discuss her highly unusual relationships with her lovers, husbands, children, and employees, all of which were controversial and flat out strange. And full disclosure here, I met this wild woman in the late 1980s at a conference in San Diego when I was a teenager. And it was her anger and ire and intolerance that turned your narrator from an atheist to an agnostic rather than the other way around. Even the great writer and polemicist Christopher Hitchens, no stranger to outrage and controversy, called her, quote, a mad woman. So let's learn more about this hellraiser and rabble-rouser, Madalyn Murray O'Hair. She was born Madalyn Mays into a seemingly ordinary family in Pittsburgh in 1919. The family later moved next door to the environs of Toledo, Ohio, where she graduated from high school in 1936. At the outbreak of the Second World War, she married for the first time to a steel worker named Henry Roths, and that was in 1941. But this union seemed doomed from the start, as he soon enlisted in the Marine Corps, and she too enlisted in the Women's Army Corps. She was posted to Italy, where she worked in cryptography for the U.S. military. Now, what is cryptography? Well, in a nutshell, it's code breaking, based on a variety of methods that have changed over time as technology has rapidly advanced. So during the war period, it would be considered primitive by today's standards, but was nevertheless quite successful in cracking some of the enemy's most classified and secret communications. It was during her stint in Italy that she became romantically involved in an illicit affair with a married serviceman named William Murray. She ditched and divorced Mr. Roths pretty quickly and pursued a marriage with Mr. Murray, but her amorous wishes were rejected. Nevertheless, this tryst resulted in the birth of a son named William Murray III, and he'll enter the picture later as the story progresses. Now divorced and with an infant child, she returned to the U.S. and completed her college degree at Ashland University in Ohio. She then went on to earn a law degree at the South Texas College of Law in Houston, but she failed to pass the bar exam and was therefore never officially sanctioned to practice as an attorney. But this academic glitch would not dissuade her from pursuing legal action for the rest of her life, and it's these numerous controversial court cases for which she is most remembered and usually reviled. The next move was to Baltimore, where she gave birth to a second son with another boyfriend named Michael Fiorello. And this child's name was John Garth Murray, as the two biological parents split up quickly, and it's likely that John never met his birth father. This mother-son relationship is straight out of the Sophocles Oedipus Rex legend. These two bizarre characters were joined at the hip from birth until death, and this too will become clear as our story progresses. While in Baltimore at the height of the Cold War, Madalyn became an overt and unrepentant communist. and organized meetings of fellow travelers in her apartment there, she railed against the U.S. and capitalism in general. As such, she soon found herself on the radar of the FBI, and dossier of her movements and activities were compiled. But I'm guessing here that during the height of the Red Scare, she reveled in this and wore this clandestine attention as a badge of honor. On 2 occasions, once from the United States and the other from France, she attempted to immigrate to the Soviet Union, and both times was rebuffed. So this very animated and agitated person was not only unpopular in her own country, she was rejected by its great enemy of the Cold War. Back home in Baltimore, dejected and rejected, I guess, she laid down the hammer and sickle for the time being and took up the equally unpopular torch of atheism as her primary cause. And it's here in the late 1950s and early 1960s that she first gained real public notoriety, and her legacy as an agitator and disruptor was cemented. Unnerved by her son William being forced, or at least coerced, to recite the Pledge of Allegiance to the United States and also attend compulsory Bible study in the Baltimore public schools, she filed a lawsuit on his behalf against the local school district on the grounds of the separation of church and state as cited in the First Amendment of the U.S. Constitution. As this case snaked its way through the courts, she formed the organization American Atheists in 1963, which remains in existence to this day. And as to its founding, she puts it this way, quote, "An atheist loves his fellow man instead of God. An atheist believes he can get no help through prayer, but that he must find within himself the inner conviction and strength to meet life, to grapple with it, subdue it, and enjoy it." She then goes on to say that, quote, "An atheist strives for an involvement into life and not an escape into death. He wants disease conquered, poverty vanquished, and war eliminated." Her case was heard by the Supreme Court of the same year, and the court, then headed by Earl Warren, ruled in her favor by a vote of 8-1. And despite this legal victory, it's then that she was bestowed her famous moniker by Life magazine as, quote, "the most hated woman in America." She was known to remark throughout the rest of her life that she considered this description as a badge of honor. She soldiered on over the next few decades in litigious tanglings regarding all things atheist and irreligious, with various results. Among one of the more notable suits was O'Hair versus Payne, and no, we're not talking about Thomas here. This case was brought in 1971, where she sought to ban all U.S. astronauts from reading biblical scripture from all space flights, as members of Apollo 8 had done a few years before. Now hated and loving every minute of it, she and the boys were off to Hawaii for fear of harassment, or worse, on the mainland. In 1965, in Honolulu, she married a U.S. Marine who also, imagine this, happened to be a communist. And his name was Richard O'Hair. But wait, he was also a rat who purportedly outed more than 100 other Reds to the FBI. Though they too soon went their separate ways, they technically remained married until his death in 1978. During the same year, another pivotal event takes place. The teenage William, or Bill as he goes by, fathered a daughter with his girlfriend. The child was Robin Eileen Murray O'Hair, and yep, she too will play her own part in this wider story. So now we've got 3 generations hanging out and hiding out together in Hawaii. She remained an outspoken radical throughout the 60s and 70s and was widely quoted during this period. She opined on all things political and religious and was a lightning rod of sorts during this era of tumult and cultural change. Among her targets were predictably Christians of all stripes, but she was also a fierce anti-Semite and Holocaust denier. And despite her various dalliances, she also really seemed to hate men, calling out the other half of the population and saying this, quote, 9 out of 10 men are breast-fixated, wham-bam, thank you ma'am, cretins who don't give a damn about anybody's gratification but their own. Well, at the risk of sanctimony, I hope I'm part of the 1 out of 10 club. It's also amusing to note that despite her feminism, she would eventually go on to be the official speechwriter to the notorious pornographer and publisher of Hustler magazine, Larry Flynt, in his ill-fated run for the presidency a few years later. In 1980, however, her young son William, perhaps tired of his mother's rants, disavowed his mother's atheism and embraced Christianity, where he became and remains an ordained Baptist minister to this day. Well, upon this conversion, she said of him, quote, one could call this a postnatal abortion on the part of the mother, I guess. I repudiate him now and for all times. He is beyond human forgiveness. Wow. Wouldn't you love a mother like that? So I've warned you, no matter what your views are, this is a nasty person, and when we come out of the break, we'll discuss the unfortunate, but perhaps almost predictable end of Madalyn Murray O'Hair and her kin. So now it's the 1980s, and we have one son, William, who's up and gone and banished, another son, John, who is in lockstep with his mother, and then a granddaughter, Robin, who is equally committed to both her grandmother and half-uncle and their shared cause. This very unusual throuple then moved the American Atheist base to Austin, Texas, where they lived together as recluses and ran the organization with an iron fist. Madalyn officially ran the show for decades, but passed the torch to her son John in the late 1980s. The organization grew and prospered, mostly via public access cable channels widely distributed throughout the country during this era, and also various subscription publications. They also raised considerable amounts of money from bequests of atheists that chose not to be eulogized via religious service upon their passing. But in August of 1995, the trio failed to show up for work. Madalyn, then in her 70s, John about 50, and Robin about 30, were nowhere to be found at their headquarters, and this was unusual. And they had mysteriously disappeared. A search of their house revealed a sort of cryptic note attached to the door, which read, "The Murray O'Hair family has been called out of town on an emergency basis. We do not know how long we will be gone as of the writing of this memo." Food was left uneaten, and the beloved family dogs were found wandering around the premises. Nothing appeared to have been burglarized. I think we may have another Dateline episode here on our hands. On sporadic occasions over the following month, calls were received at the mothership from both John and Robin. They were reported by the staff to sound agitated and under duress. They just didn't sound like themselves. Madalyn, for once in her life, had gone radio silent. John and Robin claimed to be on business in San Antonio, but it was soon revealed that John had taken delivery of over $500,000 worth of gold coins in that city, which vastly depleted the coffers of the American Atheist organization, which now found itself in financial peril, leading to layoffs and facing impending bankruptcy. So had the weirdos absconded to a foreign country, as they had often claimed they would do? Did they shake down the organization they founded and skip out on the dime of its benefactors? Did they head off for New Zealand, which they had claimed to choose to domicile themselves in for years? There were a few more sporadic calls, but within a month, there was no further communication from the three to the home base in Austin, and the case soon went cold. In fact, it went very cold, frozen even. The O'Hairs were gone. Their nest egg was gone. Their beloved organization was in tatters. Due to her past notoriety and also her national fame, sleuths were on the case. But it was not until 1999, 4 years after their disappearance, that some revelations, she wouldn't like that word, were unearthed, literally. Thanks to an investigative journalist named John McCormick from the San Antonio Express and others, they delved deeper. He learned that a former employee of American Atheist named David Waters had been accused of embezzling about $50,000 from the organization the year before the three went missing. And for this, he had pled guilty and he had been fired. In a scathing and incendiary article written to the members, Madalyn not only publicly exposed the theft, but outed him for a murder that he had been convicted of while in his teens, and for which he had spent several years in prison. Incensed by this, Waters vowed revenge and let it be known to his then girlfriend that he harbored torture and murder fantasies regarding the old woman, as a retribution for what he considered public humiliation. Well, the local police, the feds, the IRS, and other intrepid journalists were all back on the case, and the disgruntled ex-employee was tracked down and brought in for questioning. It was during these interrogations that it was discovered that Waters had enlisted the assistance of two fellow ex-cons, whom he had known from prison, to kidnap the O'Hairs, steal their money, and convert the loot into gold bullion so as to be untraceable. The other conspirators were Gary Paul Carr and Danny Fry. The former was apprehended in Michigan, where he had been living after spending 30 years hard time for having kidnapped a judge's daughter. Now, this should give you an idea. These are not the most brilliant criminals in the world. Seriously, man, you're kidnapping a judge's daughter? So these guys are not the sharpest tools in the shed. As for Fry, he could not be located. Now, there's a reason for this, as Carr would soon confess that old Danny boy had been murdered and dismembered by the other two plotters soon after the abduction. So as for the stars of our show, no, they were not resting on a remote beach in New Zealand or hiding out in a Swiss chateau. Far from it. But they were resting, and had been doing so for more than 5 years, when Carr, finally after copping a plea deal, agreed to lead the authorities to the gruesome grave sites of the Murray O'Hairs on a ranch in the tiny south-central Texas town of Camp Wood. They had each likely been strangled, burned, and dismembered, and were only identified through dental records and the exhumation of Madalyn's metal hip from an earlier surgery. Waters was sentenced to a lengthy prison term, but he didn't last long, as he died of lung cancer at the federal penitentiary at Butner, North Carolina in 2003. That's the same place, by the way, where more notorious criminals, namely the likes of Bernie Madoff, Jonathan Pollard, and R. Kelly, have called home. Carr was given 2 life sentences, and he remains alive as of this recording. In a very bizarre postscript to an already bizarre story, the majority of the gold that was stolen by Waters and Carr was stashed in a storage unit in San Antonio, only to be stolen again just days later by a band of unknown thieves, while the 2 killers were partying with their girlfriends in Las Vegas. Now, this sounds like maybe a Coen Brothers movie, but supposedly this is the real facts. Madalyn's excommunicated son, Bill, was awarded the claimant of the remains of his mother, daughter, and half-brother that had so viciously disowned him. He had the bones committed to the earth at an undisclosed location, and despite being a devout Christian, he is said to have honored their wishes and refrained from prayer. Madalyn Murray O'Hair once remarked, quote, "I hope I live my life in such a manner that when I die, someone cares, even if it's only my dogs. I think I want some human being, somewhere, to weep for me." Well, we'll have to see about that, Madalyn.
This concludes the latest episode of Well Hung History. Run away and cry now, but before you do, make sure to subscribe and leave us a killer review. Find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and all the rest. New episodes drop regularly. Tom Payne Productions, all rights reserved and preserved.